How soon can the Jazz be contenders again? How soon will the Jazz crack the playoffs? Find out next on Locked On Jazz.
You are Locked On Jazz, your daily podcast on the Utah Jazz. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome into Locked On Jazz. My name's Leif Thulin. I'm excited to be back with you filling in for David Locke on Locked On Jazz. This is the last week of my stint, and I've enjoyed talking to you guys. As most of you guys know by now, I'm a Jazz lifelong fan, credentialed NBA draft analyst, attendee of multiple NBA combines, Jazz broadcast assistant and statistician the last 4 seasons, and lover of college hoops. So I'll make sure you know what you need to know about your beloved Utah Jazz. Thanks for making Locked On Jazz your first listen each and every day. And remember, Locked On Jazz is free and available on all platforms, including YouTube at Locked On Jazz, where the best way to help us grow is to comment anything below. And today's question is, how soon do you think the Jazz make the NBA playoffs? This episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. So take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. Today on the show, I'm going to discuss how soon I see the Jazz contending again and what the true meaning of contention is. So let's dive right in. The Jazz have not made the playoffs in 3 years, and I assume after next year it'll be a 4-year drought. And the question then becomes, how soon can we contend? And to what level are the Jazz contending when they first make it back to the playoffs? My answer lies in the episode of discussing rebuilds of previous teams that are just a couple years ahead of the Jazz. So I did an episode, the everydayers know what I'm talking about, where the Jazz could emulate a few teams. One I mentioned is the Pistons. And you look at their history, they got Cade Cunningham, which was the number 1 pick, and they had a couple other picks where they're really bad, but they ended up 5th. And I said the Jazz could be similar. But if you look at their history, how long did it take for them to make the playoffs after missing it for years? So let's look at their history. I'll abbreviate for you guys. The Pistons went 41-41 in 2019. That was their last year of true effort to win prior to this past season. In between, they went 20-46 in the COVID-shortened year, 20-52 in the year after that. Then they earned themselves a nice Cade Cunningham reward. And then they proceeded to go 23-59, 17-65, 14-68. And then all of a sudden, this past year, 44-38, and had a real chance to beat the New York Knicks, who made the Eastern Conference Finals. The Jazz in this process, if you look at the similarities between the Jazz and the Pistons, are essentially entering year 4. So top 3 odds for number 1. And that's where the Pistons were after the year prior to this past one. That's when they went 14-68. Essentially, what I'm basically breaking down is that I think the Jazz are going to be awful this upcoming year. Might be better than last year record-wise, but I think they know with intentionality that they're going to be bad. The Jazz are entering year 4 of Will Hardy, and it'll be 4 losing seasons in a row. 2 of those have a different tenor than the last 2, or what I will assume will be the last 2 of those 4 years. And then the number 1 pick would immediately, should the Jazz get it, rise the odds for the Jazz to be a playoff team. But how quickly does even if the Jazz got a number 1, if it's AJ, if it's Darren, if it's Cam, how quickly does getting that guy turn the Jazz into a playoff team, and then how quickly does that make them contenders? Well, I think the Jazz core is well ahead of what the Pistons were when they were drafting Cade, and then when they were drafting again and again, taking Ivy, taking Duren, taking guys like that. I mean, they had Killian Hayes in that process too. And then I think the Jazz are ahead of most of those teams that have been perpetual bottom dwellers recently because they have the likes of Lauri Markkanen, who's an established NBA player, who's been an all-star. Walker Kessler has a lot of future in this league. I think he's going to be a very good player for a long time. The Jazz have hit on late round picks as well. So I think the Jazz are ahead of the perpetual bottom dwellers that fit this archetype, but the timeline is still likely similar because the NBA is cyclical. More on that later. So I'm of the belief that if the Jazz could get a number 1 pick this next season, then they'd be in the play-in conversation sooner than the Pistons were in that conversation. Like, it took them a long time for when the Pistons got Cade Cunningham to then have enough pieces to get there. The Jazz, I think, have enough pieces. They just need that guy. So let's compare them to the Magic. The Magic, they had Paolo get drafted 1 year after Franz, which would be like the Jazz getting Ace Bailey this year, and then hopefully one of the big 3 of next year. And I think that would be pretty similar. The Magic then won 34 games, and then year two of Paolo Banchero, they were in the playoffs. They were in the they were in the playoffs, not the play-in. And that's a difference now because the Magic had an expectation that they could win that series. They went 7 games with the Cavaliers. And that was 2 years after having the number 1 pick and a couple years after a shrewd move of drafting Franz Wagner and enough foundational pieces that they tried to draft that weren't quite perfect to be the franchise, but were helpful pieces like Jalen Suggs, like guys like Wendell Carter, who relocated from Chicago, who were really helpful. Jonathan Isaac when healthy. We talked about that in that episode. The Jazz, in my opinion, do have the foundation to make the playoffs after drafting one excellent player. And the Jazz should still have Lauri. They should still have Walker Kessler, and Ace should develop, which I think all 3 will. They'll all get better. So the play-in to me, after year 1 of that guy, so I don't think it's feasible this year. I don't think the Jazz are even considering the play-in. I don't think that's something they'd even want. And I don't know if it's likely the first year of said fantastic rookie, but maybe the next season is when the Jazz can contend for the play-in. But the reason I hesitate to say that is the East is a lot easier than the West. So my actual prediction is to make the playoffs, not just the play-in, without tremendous luck, is the season after that. So it's not this season, not the next season, but the season after that. And that plan is contingent still upon the Jazz getting a top 3 pick and then being good, that player being good. But I do believe that to be a likely outcome. You just have enough cracks at the bat of getting a high pick. And when you draft enough times at the top, the Pistons are proof in the pudding of this. You get one really good guy and you have a few other competent ones, you end up having a pretty good chance to contend. So I believe the top 3 are that good of that next draft. And in the previous episode I did, where I talked about the next guys, there's a couple other guys that I think could really help a team pretty immediately that are not in the top 3. I also think that the Jazz, when they are on this timeline, they reach the peak of Lauri's career. And they also timed this well with the ascendancy of Walker Kessler hitting his prime at the right time to complement the blooming stars of Ace Bailey and let's just say Darren Peterson, because I watched a lot of his film recently. And boy, oh boy, is he fantastic. Darren Peterson, to me, is the number 1 pick, even over AJ. So the BYU fans who are also Jazz fans, you may have some flack with me there, and we could have an ongoing discourse throughout the season. But right now, AJ I don't think he's as good as Darren Peterson. But anyway, I digress. I think the Jazz should believe that this is the appropriate timeline because it times up the primes of current players. Maybe Filipowski turns out great. Maybe Taylor Hendricks reaches a level like Josh Lloyd brought up, that Taylor Hendricks is a really interesting player and his season could really improve. And he looks huge. He could be a defensive monster and he can complement what the Jazz do offensively. So I don't expect the playoffs this year, not next year, but the year after that is my expectations for the Jazz in the playoffs. But coming up next, let's discuss how long until the Jazz can truly win and contend. And what does that actually mean in the grand scheme of things in the NBA? For the Jazz, is truly winning a championship? Is the Jazz truly winning, making the same level of a run that they made with Darren Williams? Is it the same as making that run that they made with Donovan and Gobert? What is contention in the NBA, and what is it for the Utah Jazz when they get a star? Let's talk about that next. Head on Locked On Jazz. Most people can't name all their financial accounts or even what they're worth, whether it's in 401ks, properties, or investments, and we don't have the full picture. You can end up leaving money on the table. That's where Monarch Money comes in. It's an all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean, easy-to-use interface on your laptop or on your phone. Monarch does all the heavy lifting for you. You can link your accounts in minutes, see clear visual data visuals, get smart categorization of your spending, and finally feel in control of your money without ever touching a spreadsheet. So if you have a bunch of streaming services and one you don't use anymore, you can look at that and say, Monarch Money, save me money because I'm not using this anymore. For me, it was Hulu. I'd stopped using Hulu years ago, forgot all about it. Monarch alerted me to that, and it saved me money each and every month by telling me you're not using Hulu anymore. You might as well not pay for it. So don't let financial opportunities slip through the cracks. Use code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com in your browser for half off your first year. That's 50% off your first year at monarchmoney.com with code LOCKEDONNBA. Welcome back, guys. I have an important request for you guys. Locked On wants to hear from you. We've put together a survey to learn more about our listeners and make your favorite podcasts even better. This is your chance to tell us what you like and what you don't. and answer questions about our advertising. So go to lockedonpodcast.com/survey to get started. Everyone who completes the survey will be entered for a chance to win one of 10 $100 Amazon gift cards. Again, that's lockedonpodcast.com/survey. You can also find the link in our show notes. And thank you guys for helping us out. And if you're watching on YouTube, there's a little QR code right there as well. So you can scan that. But we really appreciate your guys' support, of course, but also want to learn what could make our shows better and what you like about them. So welcome back to Locked On Jazz. I'm going to start this segment with a fact. A sad one when you really get down to it. But if you really think about it, it's one that tells the story of how the NBA is. But the reason it's sad is, as Jazz fans, it's been a long time since the Jazz have made a conference finals. It's been 18 years since the Jazz made the conference finals. And since then, the Jazz have made the playoffs 10 times, which is pretty good if you think about it. In those 18 years, the Jazz had prolonged stretches of making the playoffs, which not all teams can do after, getting close-ish to winning a championship. But we've also had down years like the ones we're in right now. 3 years in a row without making the playoffs, I assume before, probably even 5 before making it again. And it becomes a more humbling thing after the years of consistency that Jerry Sloan built for years with Stockton and Malone. But the reason I said it's a humbling fact is, out of those 10 times the Jazz made the playoffs, which is a good number in those 18 years, especially if you were to say it was 10 of 14 before this stretch, or sorry, 10 of 15 before the stretch. Out of those 10 times, the Jazz have won only how many playoff series? If those of you listening at home, and before I answer it, you can answer it in your head, but the answer is 5. The Jazz have only won 5 playoff series since 2007, and that is not very good. And then I beg the question of, so how close were the Jazz really to contending in those seasons when we were considered good? And what is the truth of how to truly compete? I would argue that the Jazz with Darren and Carlos, the team that I love, it's still my favorite team I've ever watched. I grew up watching Darren Williams. At one point in my life, I had a Darren Williams jersey and t-shirt of every color, and I still kept a couple of them. That is the team that made me a Jazz fan, and near and dear to my heart. I would argue the team with Darren and Carlos at the helm were not truly close, as the Spurs and the Lakers, who were the two big threats in the West at the time, were never truly threatened by the Jazz. The Jazz did make the Final Four, speaking in terms of how they made these playoffs. They made it to the Western Conference Finals in 2007. They had some luck with the Warriors, that we believe Warriors taking out the Mavs, who won 67 games that year. But the Jazz made the Final Four, and we got swept. So are you really close when you get swept in the Final Four versus, contending and making it 7 games where I'd say you're close? I would say the point still applies. The Jazz weren't truly close in that time. Then they still had more times with Darren and Carlos, and the Jazz kept running into the Lakers and couldn't get over the hump. And, they made some of those series competitive, but never truly threatened to win the series. So then we go to Gordon and Rudy, and Gordon Hayward and Rudy Gobert. We ran into the Warriors and the Rockets with consistency, and the Jazz were even further away from those top teams than the Jazz were with Darren and Carlos, but also they weren't as good as those teams. The Gordon and Rudy teams were flawed. They were teams that were fun because, hey, we're overachieving, but we're not really in the same ilk of the teams that truly can contend. The Darren and Carlos team had some belief that they could. They just weren't as good as the Kobe Bryant-led Lakers and the Tim Duncan-led Spurs. Now you get to Rudy and Donovan, and I would argue this is the best team that the Jazz have had in my lifetime. I wasn't alive for Stockton and Malone. The Rudy and Donovan teams, I would say the one that lost to the Clippers, that was the only true contender I've ever watched. And that said, we lost in the second round. We won 1 series that year. I think that the Jazz could have beaten the Suns in the Western Conference Finals. I'd have favored the Suns because the Suns had a good matchup. It was difficult. They shoot a lot of mid-range jump shots, which is what the Jazz like to make teams shoot, but they were proficient at it. And the Suns smoked the Clippers, who beat the Jazz. And the Jazz would have had a chance to beat the Bucks because Rudy takes away the rim. Giannis can put up big numbers, but the Jazz don't have to help in the same way other teams do. And he'd have to put up unbelievable, astronomical numbers to beat the Jazz. And I think the Jazz's offense could work. We may not win that series, but at least I believe there's a world where we could have beaten the team that won the championship. And that's not something I could say at any other point in my life. But having said all that, that only yielded 1 playoff series win. And that's the humbling fact that I think is a slight bit depressing. So the point being made here is winning is hard. Winning is really hard in the NBA, not only because, some teams just have better players. Some teams have the advantage of, getting a free agent that can really change their tides, but also windows of contention slam shut quickly. And we saw just how quickly the Jazz can win a playoff series. And then the next year, the Jazz, you think, well, you got Bogey and Conley, and you run it back, and we're going to be great. And the Jazz's vibes were not the same. Like the NBA, the egos, the development of other teams, stuff you can't control happens anyway. Like teams get better, and you can't stop that. And then there's stuff you can control, like the Jazz locker room thing. George Niang leaves. The Jazz weren't as friendly as a team. There was stuff about Donovan wanting out, Donovan and Rudy not liking one another. And all of a sudden, the Jazz's best team in 2 decades is on the way out. And now the Jazz are in a spell where they're missing 3 playoffs in a row, probably 4, potentially 5. And I'd say you'd be really happy to be 6 years away from being at a similar level to where they were. Like you'd be thrilled about that. And that's how humbling the NBA is. Winning is really difficult in the NBA. So I think the question becomes, how good can the Jazz's best player be? And how good does the best player on a championship team have to be, especially in this new CBA? So the question will depend on of how quickly the Jazz can truly contend will depend on how good the best player is, because Darren Williams was all NBA occasionally, and Donovan was not quite with the Jazz, but he was in the same tier, and he's been all NBA since. But they weren't top 10 bona fide, absolute top 10 players in the NBA that could level up a team around them. And Rudy was great. And I actually would argue Rudy was the better player for the Jazz than Donovan. He was more valuable because of what he did on both sides of the ball, because the Jazz were awful defensively other than Rudy Gobert. But his role and his value is calculated differently than a guy like Donovan's, than a guy like Darren's. So the question is essentially, can a guy like my guy Darren Peterson be a top 10 player in the NBA? Because frankly, that's what's needed to contend at the highest level. You look at the recent champions, they've had a top 10 player. Every champion for a long, long time has had a top 10 player. And those are the ones that contend at the highest level. And the Jazz teams that have been good have had good teams comprised of good players, but very few great ones. And the best Jazz team we've seen in that span was a team that lost the Clippers, and the Jazz were 52-20, and that was really, really good. But you look at the teams that have just won championships, I want to say that the Thunder were 68-14. Like and they still had to struggle. They went 7 twice. Like the NBA is getting closer. Their teams are closer to one another, and there's better depth. And it's really hard to build a team that's good enough to win as much as you have to win to be a championship contender. The Jazz's offense was fantastic that year, but they were super one-dimensional defensively, and they got burned for being awful on the perimeter on defense. So that team really wasn't that close. When you look at the comparison to the Thunder, who were a youthful team, and they just won a championship, they had a million really good defenders, and they also had the MVP on their team. The Jazz had Donovan Mitchell, and Donovan Mitchell that year was nowhere close to what Shai Gilgeous-Alexander was. Not to mention, the Thunder had a lot of really good players complimenting him that I would say, other than Gobert being better than Chet at the current time, the rest of the Thunder were ahead, and their defense significantly ahead. The one thing that I think favors the Jazz going forward is the new CBA. It prevents teams from paying stars heavily without sacrificing their depth. You got to play 240 minutes in today's NBA, and that's all the minutes in a basketball game. That's 48 times 5. And when you play 240 minutes, but you pay one player $48 million, and you play another guy 40, the rest of your team doesn't have enough depth. And that's why you're seeing guys like Michael Porter Jr. shipped away, because he didn't carry enough value to the Nuggets, and they wanted more players that could help rather than one guy who was paid a lot but wasn't helping them enough. You're going to see that more and more. And I think it bodes better for small market teams like the Utah Jazz than it does big teams that are paying their stars a pretty penny. The Thunder had the blueprint to a T. They got a star in Shai via trade, drafted wisely after a few years of tanking, got Chet and Jalen Williams, and now they're set for a while. But they'll soon face a time where they have to figure out who to pay, how to pay them. Isaiah Hartenstein was a key addition. Alex Caruso, a key addition. But who can they pay? Like, they've already taken care of Jalen Williams and Chet Holmgren, but they're going to lose their depth because they're paying 3 guys a ton. And they're going to face that time. I mentioned this to say that the Jazz, should they draft a young star, a Darren Peterson, an AJ DiManza, that they instantly create a window of time to compete, because the best time to win right now is when a star franchise player is on a rookie deal or in their first contract after a rookie deal, and they've already established truthful stardom at that point. And the Jazz can do that by drafting well and getting a little bit fortunate in the lottery, which they have not done yet. So to me, this bodes well for the Jazz if they do draft well, and they'll likely have a way to become a solid team, even if they don't get super lucky in the lottery, because they have a Lauri Markkanen, they have 2 rookie deals with Ace and whoever's next up that's going to be a top 8 pick, because that's the top 8 protected, and they have Walker Kessler. The timeline bodes well. Also, the teams that are contending now are going to age. Some are going to age out. Some are going to have to trade their players because they don't have the money for it. So when the Jazz actually can compete, I think that the rest of the NBA is forming in different ways, and the Jazz, the pathway to contention is a proper time, because I think the NBA, too many teams can't sustain what they're paying their players right now, because everyone wants to get paid the super maxes if they're eligible. And the Jazz, when you draft young players in consecutive years, you're going to have a couple guys on similar timelines that you then see how good they are when you cultivate them. And I think what happens is there's going to be more and more teams that follow this guideline. Like the Spurs are one of the best setup teams forever, because Wembanyama is a top 10 impact player in the NBA right now, and he's paid very little compared to everyone else that is a top 10 impact player. So the Spurs can make win now moves. The Jazz can do that because they have a lot of assets. We'll talk about that and a lot more coming up ahead, because when can the Jazz actually compete? Let me lay that out next, of when the Jazz can win playoff series as opposed to just attend the invitational of making the playoffs. All that and more straight ahead on Locked On Jazz. Let me tell you about Intercap Lending, though. It's one of the largest independent lending companies. They are extremely responsive, embrace change. They're up to the newest terms, everything that you could experience, they do fantastically. And there's so many testimonials of borrower experience going very, very well. There's so many nightmares that you hear about other companies. Everything with Intercap is a fantastic experience from the borrowers. They're also a direct issuer, and you think, man, they must take care of you so well because they're small. No, au contraire. There's 44 states where Intercap takes care of, and it's not just Utah, but they give you that small feel because they put so much attention to you, the client, that they make you feel like it can only be small, but they really are super prolific and are unbelievable everywhere they are. You can service your own loan, build long-term relationships that are better for the consumer. And our guy is Steve Carter. He's our own personal loan officer for Locked On Jazz. So make sure to call him at 385-800-8528, and make sure you tell him you're a Locked On listener and get the corporate discount. Intercap Lending, NMLS number 190465. For more information, visit intercaplending.com. All right, welcome back to Locked On Jazz. Leif Thulin with you here. So my assumption, with all that said about the CBA and how it benefits small teams, and I'll give some examples. I think the Jazz will make the play-in by 2027 and the playoffs by 2028. And that's what I expect, assuming the Jazz get a high draft pick, and hopefully we draft well in the upcoming draft. But to me, contending is by year 4 of the rookies from next year's class. So if it's Darren Peterson, it is year 4 of Darren Peterson for the Jazz to be true contenders, a team that can win multiple playoff series. And like I said, it's really difficult. The Jazz made the playoffs 10 times, and none of those 10 times did we win multiple playoff series. The last time we won multiple playoff series in the same time was 2007. That's a long time ago. That was Darren Williams, Carlos Boozer, AK, Memo, Ronnie Brewer. You know the crew. My belief, though, is based on looking at the best players drafted recently and how soon their teams that were bad enough to be picking number 1 overall were able to win series, and how soon they were able to win multiple series. So let's look at Anthony Edwards. He's been a model of success for a number 1 pick in the development of a number 1 pick and the development of a team around him, making win now moves such as acquiring Rudy Gobert, such as getting Mike Conley. Anthony Edwards has made back-to-back Western Conference Finals. And that was in his 4th year, his 5th year. So Darren Peterson, 4th year. I think that's not crazy. In the Jazz, you can make the argument we're better situated right now than what Anthony Edwards was when he first came in. Yes, Karl-Anthony Towns was there, but they had a lot of questions. There's a reason that team had not made a playoff run other than the 1 year with Jimmy Butler, where he was there very shortly and was very dissatisfied and frustrated. for a long time because they had a lot of young pieces that didn't amount to winning basketball. The Jazz have young pieces that haven't won yet, but they do have a foundation. Now let's look at another guy. It's not just cherry picking Anthony Edwards. Let's look at Paolo. He's entering year 4 this upcoming year, and I expect the Magic to win a series this year for the first time. I think they could win too because Jason Tatum's out, Tyrese Halliburton's out. That's 2 of the better teams in the East. The teams that have made the finals the last 2 years are out. There's the Cavaliers, there's the Knicks, and then I think the Magic are a team that can truly contend. I really believe that. So Paolo is entering year 4, and I expect them to win a series. Now let's look at Evan Mobley. He just took a huge leap in his year 4, and the Cavaliers were the 1 seed in the East. This is a team in year 5, though they got Donovan Mitchell, but it's the same thing. They picked highly. They're bad enough to pick highly, and they made winning moves. The Jazz can do that. We have assets. And that's the best year because young guys don't cost too much at that point, and their age is gradually improving, right? They're young, they're going to get older, and they're getting better. And that's what the sign of a really good pick is, and a guy who can transform your franchise, have the keys to your franchise, and be a transformative piece. Those guys improve year in, year out. You look at the statistics, they move up, and you look at it from just statistics, those are better. You look at impact, and that's what's super important. And all of those guys made larger impacts each and every year. And year 4 reached a point where their impact can still improve, but it's high enough to where they can truly contend. Their teams can truly contend. So I also think that the current best teams, likely by that point when the Jazz are in year 4 of Darren Peterson, AJ DeBonsa, Cam Boozer, whoever it might be, hopefully one of those guys, that the current best teams get broken up, both because their teams are out of their prime and because there's new waves of teams that have been bad and stockpiling picks and are better and therefore incentivize the current teams that are contending to move on from what they've got because they can't contend at the same level. So I believe that the Jazz from 2028 to 2032, that's the Jazz's championship window. The Donovan Mitchell window for the Jazz was 5 years. The Darren Williams, and that window was only really open to win for 2.5 of them. The Darren Williams and Carlos Boozer window was 4.5 years, and it was really only open for 2.5 of those years. And you would just say, well, was it really open if they weren't able to win a series in a couple of those years? That's a real question. Darren and Boozer pushed the eventual champs a few times. Like they pushed the Lakers a couple times, but so maybe they were closer than we knew. We just bad draw. But there were teams in the West that did better than us in the regular season. Like to really contend, it's very unlikely a team's going to finish 4th or 5th. Like the Jazz are going to have to be in those years 1, 2, and 3 in the West. And the recipe's clear in today's NBA. Have wings that score and defend and put pressure and are versatile, and have versatile pieces around them with length that protect the rim, that guard on the perimeter, that have value that is more than just one way, either offense or defense. And we saw this past year, egalitarian attacks with depth is what led to making the NBA Finals. The Pacers were contestants in the finals from that 4 spot with a franchise that was built off of good trades, shrewd acquisitions, and a team that played really well together. But what's going to happen is they're going to have to pay a lot of their guys. Pascal Siakam's going to age out eventually. And how long can they truly contend? Tyrese Halliburton got an injury. That changes things. So will the Pacers be good by the time the Jazz are good? Probably not. OKC, I think, is a little bit different because they're so young and so good. But what does help is paying Lauri Markkanen what we do right now is a ton of money. It really is. And I don't think it's right. You don't want that to be your number 1 option. You don't want that to be your number 2. And you certainly don't want that to be your number 3. But I think that money he's paid now will look more tame by then when we are making the playoffs. And maybe he will age out when we're true contenders. But it's a window in which the Jazz can make win now acquisitions because of his money. You can have people that are interested in dealing with the Jazz because the Jazz will have, let's say, Darren Peterson as option 1, Ace is option 2, Lauri is a veteran leader option 3, Walker Kessler guarding the interior, scoring 15 and 12 like Josh Lloyd outlined as his true future as his peak. And then the Jazz have their picks that are now important because the Jazz are trying to win, and those picks have value. You can trade those picks and make them ammunition in trades that'll then say, look, we're trying to get better. Let's give up these picks because we're trying to get better, not just stockpiling picks for nothing. Like those picks aren't going to be the best for when we're having them because the teams got better from getting Donovan Mitchell and Rudy Gobert. But we have those picks. We can use those picks if one of them does turn out well. If the Lakers pick in 2027 is a lucrative pick, the Jazz can say, look, we think we're on the brink of making a real run. Let's trade that pick and get a real player. And I think having that possibility, those assets, makes it possible for the Jazz when they are ready to contend to elevate their stock from more than just, look, we got Lauri and Kessler, and we're praying that Ace and a guy like Darren Peterson, that Keontae and Hendricks and Filipowski grow with those other guys. Like, there's other pieces we don't know who they are yet that will be on the Utah Jazz because the Jazz made those moves then. It's a long game. We were never going to win the trade outright in 2 years with Donovan Rudy. We have to hope that we can win it down the road. And the other reason I believe in true contention for the Jazz, meaning 2 series in 1 year being won by the Jazz, making the conference finals, is a 4 seasons away, 5 seasons away type of thing, is the Jazz have those assets. And, not all these teams have both assets and the players to win. The Jazz could quickly have players to win should they get lucky in the lottery, and they have those assets. And I think that's a combination that's very rare, especially with the CBA being changed, because most teams that are win now are paying a fortune, and then they have to trade away players. And then the Jazz can both acquire or trade away. They're in a spot where they can make either move, and they're situated well. While the Jazz, in my opinion, don't have a top 5 core right now, and I don't think even they don't have a top 5 youthful core right now. I'm just going to be honest. I wish we did. But their combination of core and assets does rank well. And the key, of course, is getting a star, whether it's via a shrewd move like the Pacers got Halliburton, or whether it's winning the draft, getting Cade Cunningham, the Paolo Banchero, the Anthony Edwards. I do think the NBA is cyclical. I said I'd mention this. I'm going to end on it. The NBA is cyclical. The longest playoff droughts, other than the astounding ones like the ones the Kings had from when they went from Mike Bibby and Peja and all those guys and Chris Webber to just recently making the playoffs again after forever. The majority of those teams that have quote unquote droughts are teams that return to the playoffs and the promised land within 5 years. So the Jazz really should be in the playoffs pretty quickly. I'm expecting it as a 6-year drought for the Jazz to make the playoffs. I think the play-in's feasible in year 5 after. But a team like the Jazz, who has as much history and a history of success with Jerry Sloan, making it for 20 plus years in a row, making it 10 of 18 years after making the conference finals and making the playoffs in that year, of course, too. It's a team like the Jazz who wants to win, that is frustrated by not winning. I think it comes back around. The Jazz have another window coming soon. I think there are 5-year cycles in the NBA, and it's really the prime of a career and then a rookie contract. And it's a prime of a career and a rookie contract. Those are the 4 or 5 year things that I think are cyclical. And the Jazz just need one star rookie to change their future there. So in conclusion, the cyclical nature of the NBA bodes well for the Jazz. The Jazz, and I believe many other teams, will have to deal with the new CBA. And I think many will overreact to the CBA and make bad moves, ones that are anticipatory and not necessarily proven. And the Jazz, having not been paying tons for their players right now and not paying big money immediately to guys that have to impact this second, means that the Jazz will be able to navigate the CBA better when other teams make mistakes and have to trudge through those treacherous waters first and make the Jazz more adept. And then the Jazz will then be able to take advantage of those mistakes, whether it's getting a guy on a deal or when the Jazz have their own time to make deals on rookie players, how much to extend them for, how do you navigate this and that. I think the Jazz's timeline to contend is one that is more familiar with how the CBA works and what is working well. So the Jazz need to get one star one way or another. They need a top 10 player to truly contend. And frankly, in my lifetime, the Jazz have not had a consistently top 10 value player in the NBA. They need to get one of those to truly contend because they haven't contended in my lifetime. And then the Jazz have to shrewdly move with the CBA and redistribute their pieces, as cores will not be able to stay together as long. Some teams are going to age out. The Jazz age in, and they have a 5-year contention window. Let me know what you guys think. It's been a long wait, and buckle in for one more disappointing year, and then I believe the ascension will happen. Let me know what you guys think. Do you agree with my timeline? Do you agree with the vision? And also, is anyone here also on board with Darren Peterson over AJ DeMonsa? Because I'm starting to get there. Thank you for making Locked On Jazz your first listen today. For your second listen, find the Locked On NBA podcast where there's no offseason. Doug, Matt, and Hayes keep you up to date on contract negotiations, rumors, and everything you need to be the most informed NBA fan. Find Locked On NBA on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.